Good afternoon. Hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Professor.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hello, Brandon. Hey, Alex. Let's let everybody in and we'll resume. Shu Ying, I got your email. I wrote you back.
Yes, I just see it.
You did see it. Oh,
Yeah.
good. I wanted to check with you. All right, great. So, more people at the door. So, let's let everybody in. Have my usual announcements. Let's see. All right. It looks like just about everybody here. Good afternoon. So, I have a handful of announcements, and I want to return to P5, the programming, the language that we got a little taste of the other day. If by any chance any of you did miss, let me just let Rose in. If any of you did miss the other day, I think you'll be okay. It'll be just a little bit more challenging. On a shallow level, I just want to add that there's no homework related to this particular topic, and it's not going to be a feature in the final project. It's really something just because the school wants you exposed to it, and I think it's a pretty good idea myself. So we're just going to spend one more day today on it. I think I've let everybody in, so I'm just going to switch right to screen sharing, use the handout, make sure I don't miss anything. All right. So naturally, there's no class this Thursday, Thanksgiving. Also no class on Friday, I should mention. So what I have here is the chart. Let me see something. I could swear I updated this. I guess I didn't. All right. Small changes though. Let one more person in. No significant changes here. I just want to draw your attention. One more person at the door. I really wish there was just an automatic feature, for that waiting room. Just say, oh, let everybody in. All right, in any case, what days do we have remaining? Okay. Second there. Sorry about that. I like starting right away, but I'm easily distracted by the doorbell. All right. Think we're finally ready. Okay. No class this Thursday. No class Friday for those of you who have Friday classes such as myself. So what days are remaining? I want to point something about these days that are remaining. One really odd thing is usually there's 27 sessions in my experience of the 2-day week classes like this one. But it doesn't always work out precisely the same. Let me just double check the door one more time, you patient people. There we go. All right. And yet, we're a little bit ahead in that sense. So this would be the 26th class. This would be the 27th class, which means I have a little bit more wiggle room. And for that reason, I don't think we're going to have a class on December 15th. That's exam week. Unless there's an exam, teachers choose whether they need that additional day or not.
Now, the next time I disagree with you.
Yes, teachers really choose whether or not they need that extra day. So it looks like we're plenty ahead. So these are the days you can expect with this class ending December 10th. So there's 4 classes after today, right? Anybody have any questions about that? Probably not. Makes more sense when you look at a calendar, but there it is, just as a grounding thing. The videos are up to date. I've said everything I have about online tutoring for anyone who still wants to avail themselves of that advantage. No, I haven't done any grading in the last 2 weeks, which would really be mostly late work for this particular class, by and large. So I need to get to that as soon as I can. I'll keep you posted. But again, if you have not visited Blackboard, don't wait to the last minute. The weighted column in Blackboard gives you the best idea of what your grade's going to be. About attendance, it doesn't weigh in very heavily during this COVID-dominated year of 2020. So it's really going to be mostly, largely the average of your homework grade, largely. So if you're seeing anything disturbing on Blackboard, especially in the weighted column, just called weighted average, you need to take immediate action. See what went wrong. Did the homework you do show up as a 0? That type of thing. But act sooner than later. All right. Just a quick word, probably the last software announcement as it is. After today, we're going back to Adobe Animate. And, I've thought and rethought this strange decision of mine to insert, P5, in the middle of our last section of the class. And I think the main argument is I really didn't, for one, I didn't want to do the final project early, lose people's momentum and enthusiasm by ending with a final project early and just tagging on this P5 at the end. The other reason being that P5 does involve motion, and I do enjoy comparing these two ways of seeing drawing and seeing motion from a standard software package like Adobe Animate, which has nearby cousins that don't lean on programming. After Effects would be another one. Toon Boom would be another one. But P5 gives you a good taste of what that role is in animation and other things. I just want to say for the record, I'm not a big 3D guy, but people who are heading into 3D may also wind up having to explore. Sorry, someone else got locked out. People going into 3D may find themselves exploring at some point measures of programming. Again, I'm not the authority on 3D, but at least one recent movie, tip of my tongue, 3D movie about a very red-haired girl, loads of red hair, and they had to program the hair. The hair was this massive feature of that animation, and every move she made, and if the wind or weather came, that the hair moved naturally. It was programmed to respond to other elements on screen, which is, pretty unusual. So anyway, this P5 is a good way to get a taste of programming, especially the kind of programming that may relate to other fields like animation primarily. Okay, I want to tell you what I got for you because this is real different than what we did the other day. So the other day, we were leaning very heavily on the P5 website itself. And anyone who wants to visit that, the links, I believe, are again in the homework box, the optional homework box at the end of today's handout. It's where everybody starts who has any reason to engage P5. And you might remember that we looked at samples that came from the P5 website, and it allowed us to edit those samples as a way to warm up to the language itself and actually see what our small changes would be like. But naturally, the people who are heavy into this are not working on the P5 website. They're working in any kind of code editor. And the ones we've been using in this class, just about everybody has been using SublimeText. Chris was using brackets, which is awesome, by the way. The two programs are interchangeable. And so they would whip out a code editor, like those two, like Sublime, and work it. Now, this is what I want to do today. So I want to introduce what it would take to use a language like P5 in Sublime. And that's one of my main goals. I want to touch on a lot of the flavors, a little bit of drawing, a little bit of motion, some of the highlights of what we saw in that language last class.
Professor?
Yes.
If you have a couple of minutes after class, I'd like to speak to you about the projects.
Sure.
If you have
Yeah, I'll make time for you, Chris.
Okay.
Thanks for letting me know now.
Mhm.
So I just want to recap one basic thought about P5. There's a family of languages. I kind of see it as the Java family. And we don't really hear about Java as much as we used to, but we hear about JavaScript, a child of Java. JavaScript is a big player. And those of you who like programming, would like to do more, maybe you like the web design part of this class best, and you also like programming, JavaScript makes a lot of sense. We teach it at this school, and it just makes a lot of sense to learn. HTML and CSS are really good friends of JavaScript. That would be a very reasonable other language to learn. JavaScript is used as an element in e-commerce and in all kinds of things. So you already recognized last class that some of this stuff looked a little like CSS, because all these languages are a family, and you start to recognize stuff, which makes it easier to move forward. I hope to show you more of that today. All right, let's get rolling. The thing we need today is the assets, big time. So you can get the assets from the two usual places. We took a break from assets, right? During animation, we didn't use them much, if at all. But as usual, there's two ways to get at them. Let's see. There's this here where it says then download today's important assets. You could do it from here, or you could do it from my homepage. I'm going to do it from here. Now, these assets are critical, right? Can't join me today without these. It's a little complex, not crazy, but a little complex. So once you got those assets, please get to them however you are in the habit of doing it. Again, if you're in the habit of moving assets folders elsewhere, you can go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to move mine to the desktop. It's called Class 25 Assets. Oops. And I'm going to go to the desktop and find it there. If you're used to working in downloads, I'm not going to argue right now. Now, I want to just say a little bit about this large folder and the folder inside of it. First, let's ignore this little folder called Positioning, P5. This is the last thing I'd like to give you a look at if there's time today. But if you look at the other 4 documents, one of them is HTML. The other 3 end in .js. Now that's JavaScript. So yeah, P5, right, is seen as a form of JavaScript, right? And its files all end in .js. And we're going to be using all 3, but you can't use them without an HTML file. So what I'd like for you to do is open Sublime or brackets, if that's what you're using. If there's anything old that opens, just close it up. And go to the File menu while you're still in SublimeText. And do File menu, New Window. File menu, New Window. And we're going to get to drag stuff in. We're going to start with 2 specific documents here, right? And I'd like you to drag them right into Sublime or open them any way you like. We need to get the HTML document that I just simply named p5tester.html. And we're going to also need 3shapes.js. So I'm going to drag that in. So we don't need the other 2 yet. We don't need animation 1. We don't need interactivity 1. And we don't even need the folder yet called positioning. So we're just talking about these 2, P5 tester and 3shapes.js. As soon as you're set up, I want to look at the HTML page first. I want to say something to you about our experience with HTML. So words are obviously native to HTML, right? It chooses what a paragraph is and a headline, that type of thing, right? It uses its close cousin CSS to style it, but the words are really native, to HTML. The photos, remember, we had to bring in, right? We were doing a lot of processing in Photoshop this semester to bring them in. So it means almost everything other than words comes from elsewhere. Your photos, your video. Kind of wish we had time to bring those videos into HTML that we were making. The animation, right? But even programming. So if one was going to make a small game or small interactive art project in P5, it still has to be brought into HTML. So bear with me. This HTML document is bare bones, right? I want to show you exactly what's different about it. If there's time later, I want to show you how you'd position the P5 part in a page like a photo. So you can have everything else on that page surrounding it. But in all cases, you need some HTML. So let's get a look at it. I do wish I had deleted a couple of things before I gave you this file so it doesn't confuse anybody. The line number 1 is not required. And I know I didn't cover it this semester. I'm just going to delete it. And in number 2, it says HTML, and it adds this element called language. which is also not really required. So I'm going to take it out. I'm going to resave this document. You know, usually I try to clean up anything extraneous so no one gets confused. Those are minor, minor features, not at all important. And I'm taking them out. You know, if you left them there, it wouldn't break anything. All right. Now, you remember title, of course. That's going to be on the tab in the browser. And this clearly has a reference to a style sheet, right? But I really want to draw your attention to two brand new elements. I want you to look at line 8. Now, line 8 is a strange kind of line. It's the script tag. And if you look way on the right, you'll see the script tag closes. And there's another script tag on line 11. But let's start with the one on line 8. What kind of script is this? There's a couple interesting things. One, it says at some point CDN. Now, I want to mention something about CDNs in general. It stands for Content Delivery Network, CDN, Content Delivery Network. And what's interesting about CDNs is once you learn how to hand code HTML and CSS like you guys have, you start getting interested in what kind of assets that can you connect to on the internet. So Google, for example, has Google Fonts, which I love, and any of you could probably learn how to do by looking it up, but it also involves a CDN. Google dishes up this method of letting you attach to fonts, really nice ones too. So it's called a content delivery network. Content's a strange word. I wish it was like technology delivery network. You know, that would make more sense to me. The technology that we're going to use is P5, and it will not run. Listen to this part. It will not run without the assistance of a CDN, some kind of delivery network on the internet. And there are several that deliver a P5 enabled engine, let's call it. So we're connecting to the engine for JavaScript. So this line, if you want to do more P5 after today, and you choose to do it from scratch, you want to keep this line somewhere. Because if this line is not in the head section, you cannot use P5. Quick word. We didn't have to do it when we were using the P5 website because it was running transparently. You know, it was hidden, right? They just wanted us to focus on the JavaScript. They have the fancy technique there, right? But if you're going to do it by hand, you need this line. I want to draw your attention to another script tag on line 11. And this one says source equals, and we've seen source a bunch of times, like for images, image source. So it basically sends it to get something. Now, what we want to put in here, and I'm going to ask you to join me now, is we're going to tell this HTML that the P5 we want to run is this one. Right, that I asked you to open. It's called 3shapes.js. So I want you to go into these quotes and type exactly 3shapes.js. While you're doing that, I want to mention something. I didn't put it in a subfolder, but if I did, say I'd made a folder called scripts, I would have to write scripts/3shapes.js. It's just like images. Remember how we were always writing images / you know, my picture.jpg? Same idea, but I put it loose in the main folder, so we just had to name it. All right, what I need for you to do with me is simply save this document, and we want to open it in a browser. So I'm going to go ahead and open a tab in the browser. I'm going to get my folder where I can see it. I got a big mess around here. Let me clean up a little bit. And the only one you have to drag in is the HTML. Well, wow, isn't that beautiful? Incredible. I know it's not incredible, right? The JavaScript is clearly making a bluish box, right? And we want to take this quite a bit further. But I would like to look at that JavaScript with you first. Let's get back to the code. And believe it or not, for now, we're done with the HTML. That HTML was nothing but a way to get the JavaScript on a page. All of that just for that little purpose. Let's look at the JavaScript itself, 3shapes.js. Now, I know most of you guys are, here all the time, like coming live, uh, as, as I've tried to get everyone to do. So you recognize this. Function setup we saw last week. Create canvas is creating the actual area that the P5 is going to operate in, right, rather than the whole browser. I'd like you to make a quick change to this canvas just to see what I mean. The first number is width, the second number is height, right? Now we're going to come back to these sets of numbers. Let me just see if I'm right about that. Yes, I am, but I just want you to get a look at it. So if this is width and the other one is height, what if I made the height 800, saved it? You just go back to the browser and refresh it, and you just change the height. Slightly clumsy height, right? All right, so that's just a quick reminder, right? If you want to change the background color, I'm going to ask you to open up a color picker. We kind of need a color picker today, so let's just get it out of the way. Get into your browser, open up another tab, and I think I'm just going to type hex code color picker. Last time we tried this, it brought us to the Google color picker. Hex code color picker. So if you'd like to change the background of the canvas, just pick a color now. So you start down here on this like rainbow looking bar. And then in this box, you could choose if you want it full power, if you want it lighter and more neutral, right? So there's a whole range. Here's darker. On the left is more neutral. On the right is more saturation. You pick any color you like. You see the hex code there, just highlight it, copy it. And we have to get back to the JavaScript. Quick reminder, when you're using hex code in P5 programming, it goes in these parentheses, but it also goes in quotes. And as you remember about hex code, you always use the pound sign. Save it. Get back to the tab with the example in it and refresh it. Now look, that's too big. So I want to get back to the original size. So I was just a bit of a warm up. The original size, I'm looking at my own notes over here, is 600 wide by 500 tall. So let's put that back, save it, and refresh. Now I want to tell you what our goal is. We're going to draw 3 simple shapes, and I want to make an argument for why we're doing that. People into P5 will often start with drawing, all right? And if you want to draw a house, let's say, it stands to reason that you're going to need some basic geometric shapes to get started, just to see how the program draws. So I want to show you what we're going to draw before we even move into it. Have a look at this. So I made this little map in Adobe Illustrator, and I want to show you guys a little bit, hang on a second here, about how this, what this all means. The width that I'm showing you here is 600 pixels, right? Just like ours. No coincidence. And it's 500 pixels tall. What we want to do is produce this drawing in code. So I want to point out that I put a grid here just to make a point. These are 50 pixels each, right? So 50, 100, 150. If you notice, this line starts 150 pixels over from the left wall. This box also starts 150 pixels from the left wall. Every box is 50 by 50 pixels, right? To make it easy to count, right? The triangle's a little more complicated, but sure enough, it does also start at 150, if you judge by the base, the bottom of it. What's that called? Listen, this is called X150. So I want to just mention that's used a lot. Those of you who are heading into animation who choose to go 3D, you use X and Y a lot. In fact, you even use a third dimension called Z. The Z axis is in depth. So here's a good way to get to know about X and Y. If you notice, let's focus on this red line for a minute. So the red line starts 150 pixels from the left, X150, but how far down is it? Anyone want to shout it out? You know, anybody? Nobody? No takers? 50 pixels down. Remember, I mentioned that each of these boxes is 50 by 50. So you can see this red line here starts 50 pixels down. That's called Y. Y50, the Y axis. Today we're going to use the X axis a lot and the Y axis a lot. So X is how far from the left wall? Always the left wall, right? By the way, this side is X450. We're going to see that pretty soon. But they all share this X150 on the left side, and this red line alone is 50 pixels down. It looks like the box here, this big green box, is 100 pixels down. It's Y100. So let's see how all this plays out. So we're going to build this line here, which has only two ends. We're going to have to write some numbers down to tell it where the left side's going to go and where the right side's going to go. I do want to show you something though. 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300. That line is 300 pixels wide. That's going to become important pretty soon. All right, let's get back to the code. We're talking about the JavaScript. And I'm going to back up just a little bit. I want to point out something about the comment. This double slash, I mentioned this last class, but I just want to mention again, is a form of JavaScript comment. And it's on one line, slash, slash, you just write whatever you want. So here is a comment about how we're going to draw a line. So a line has 2 points. The first point needs 2 numbers, and the one on the other side needs 2 numbers. So what it says here is first endpoint X, how far is it from the wall? And first endpoint Y, how far down is it? All right, could you go to the next line? That's line 8. And I want you to type something with me. Line, parentheses, semicolon. So you're going to see this pattern repeat a lot. You see it in Create Canvas, parentheses, semicolon, background for the color, parentheses, semicolon. This is how you make a line. So the first endpoint, X. Well, we just established it's 150 pixels over. Just type 150, comma. This is always the way you write it in the same order. So as long as you have the comment, you know what order to go in. So it knows that that line starts 150 pixels from the left wall, but it doesn't yet know how far down. So again, remember, we're talking about this spot right here.
50.
50 pixels down. Right. So 50, comma. So we did this one, and now we're here on the other end, and it wants to know it's X. You know, without a drawing in front of you, it's really hard to do in your head. So I just want to show you something about my Illustrator file here. I could do it this way to figure out what is the X for the other side of my line. Well, each box, big box here is 50, 50, 100, 150, 2, 250, 300, 350, 400, 450. This line here represents 450X all the way down. Right? That's the other side of our line. Let's go to the code and type 450. If you're feeling this at all, you probably already have a guess what the last number has to represent. It has to represent the height of that line, the y-axis, how far down it is. And if we want the line to be a straight line, it's going to have to match the other end. So let's type in 50. We're going to play with it just to see what would happen if we broke these rules. But I'd like you to save this and get back to your browser and refresh it. There's that line, just like in the Illustrator drawing. And we just drew it with code. Let me bring the code back though, so people can see it. We may need to look at it. Interesting, you know, I have to tell you something. I'm pretty nerdy. But, you know, this is really you know, I have mixed feelings about doing things this way. I really do. You know, I'm a little bit happier once I realized I could just draw my own grid somewhere and count numbers off of my grid. But again, those of you who are going to go into visual programming, I'm not talking about the language Visual Basic. I mean programming for visual ends. You're going to have to know X and Y. You really will. In fact, even designers talk about X and Y. I can prove that to you. Check something out. This is kind of interesting when you get a peek at something. So this is Adobe Illustrator I mentioned to you. Not officially part of this class. I'm going to click on the right side. I want to show you something. Look, it's giving me the X and Y. Even this is a drawing program. And it says X 450, Y 50. It's pretty interesting. So even Photoshop does this. We'll tell you with the X and Y for anything you want to know it. All right. Hey, listen, guys, did it work? Did the line show up? Cool. Because it's going to get harder. Right? I chose the easiest one first. Though I have to say the rectangle is not so bad either. I want to show you a couple things on the drawing though. So you notice the way I spaced it out, the rectangle is another 50 pixels down. So we already know the left side is 150 pixels from the wall. 50, 100, 150, right? The line was 50 pixels down, Y 50, but the rectangle is going to be Y 100. It's a whole 50 pixels further down, right? So let's take a look at the code for a minute and let's just read the comment. So let's start. It says rectangle. What is the first number it wants to know? The X position. Well, that's going to be kind of easy, right? It's 150 from the wall. Then it wants to know the Y position, all right? So it's 100 pixels down. But look at these two. The line didn't have this. It just asks for the width. How wide do you want it from there, right? And how tall do you want it? Top down. So basically it wants to know the top left corner, right? Then you just tell it how wide and tall to be. Kind of interesting. So let's go down to that next line. It's written like this, rect. And then of course, parentheses, semicolon. Let me make that a little bigger. So the X position, I tried to stay consistent, right? Again, coming back to the drawing, 50, 100, 150. It's 150 over. They're all lining up, the artwork. So there we go. In the parentheses, you simply write 150, comma. The next thing it wants to know is the Y. So that corner knows now how far to move from the wall. But now it wants to know, so let's say it's like up here, right? Let's say it wants to know how far down to go, 50, 100, 150. Let's set it to 100, comma. All right, what's the next thing they want to know? The width. Yeah, I did mention it before, but I do want to keep referencing that drawing. So let's take a quick look. Well, we know these boxes are 50 pixels wide. So 50, 100, 150, 250, 300. That's the width. This is a 300 pixel wide box. So let's go. All right, it's asking for the width. So we type it in, 300. It only thinks in pixels. Everything screen-based thinks in pixels, so we don't have to even mention that, comma. And you know what? I have no idea what the height is. I'm going to have to go look at the drawing.
200.
100, 152, right? I heard somebody say that. Yeah, 200. So let's go pop that in. 200. Let's save it. Go back to the browser and refresh it. Did it work? I want to bring my code back in case anyone made an error. So let me just bring that back up. So we're talking about line 10 right now. So I got to tell you something. I don't have this stuff memorized because, you know, the kind of work that I get really is not this. You know, I do multimedia for the web, but I'm not doing this kind of interactivity really. I do, you know, frankly, rather commercial work for that. The P5 at the moment is mostly used by artists who choose it as their favorite medium. They're making this kind of programming art. They're a fascinating and strange crowd of people, but truly fascinating. And students who are using it as a way to ease in to this kind of thinking. If it worked, I do want to return to line 8 for a minute because there was a point I wanted to make. Right? Remember, line 8 was simpler because the line was just drawn by saying one point and the other point. It never asked us for the width, though. Right? You literally had to figure out the X and Y for each side. I want to show you something. The first line, the first thing it asked was how far from the left wall? What is the X? The next thing it asked was how far down is that? So what we're talking again is this. I'm talking about this line up here, right? First thing I wanted to know is how far over the X axis, but then I wanted to know the Y axis. I want you to try something with me. We set it up that the left point was 50 pixels down, and so was the right side point of that line, 50 pixels down. I want you to take either one of them and make that bigger. So we're talking about just the Y, how far down it is, because you're going to make a diagonal line. So if I took this with this one here and changed it to say 150, look what happens in the browser. So we're looking at the line. I just told the first N to go down. It actually went behind the rectangle. I honestly wasn't sure whether it was going to go behind or in front. Clearly, there's a measuring problem going on, right? So I'm going to get back to the code there, and I just want to say that that means, if you understand that, there's all kinds of things you can do. I'm making a different diagonal. I'm actually raising the left side now. I just set it to 25 y-axis. I'm going to save it. And just refresh the browser. We're going to have to change the color of that line. It's really hard to see, isn't it? Let me just zoom in a bit. I just raised it. It's only 25 pixels down from the ceiling. So Y is measuring starting on top. The ceiling is 0, and you go down a pixel at a time, really. All right, if you'd like that line to be straight, just make sure they both have a matching Y. I'm going to set them both back to 50, but you don't have to. Back on line 8 here. 50. And the right side point is also set to 50. So this comes down to 50, then this one comes down and matches it. How are you? Pretty good? It's weird stuff, if you ask me, but it is kind of interesting. Again, like I don't know 3D, which kind of surprises people, given all the other kind of stuff that I do. I will occasionally, if someone asks me for 3D work, and I'm like, oh, I don't do that. So some of you guys are going to move way in front of me with this kind of thinking, right? If that's the kind of 3D you do, I don't want to scare anybody. You know what I mean? This is like one brand of it, that might get involved. Anyway, so the rectangle, in a way, I think it was easier. It wanted to know how far from the wall it was. We told it. It wanted to know how far down it was. We told it, right? So I just want to remind you quickly, it just wanted to know where this corner was. Yeah, it was pretty easy, just one corner. And then you simply told it the width and the height of the box. It measured down. And we said, oh, okay, give me a 300 pixel wide box and make it 200 pixels tall. Now I gotta warn you, the triangle is significantly harder, right? So let's see what it wants to know. The triangle's got 3 points. It really isn't gonna respond well to telling it width or height because it's just too complicated, right? So let's get a look at the drawing for a minute. We're gonna start on the top and work our way around clockwise. So let me zoom in on this for a minute. So it's going to want to know the X for this, right? So even though the base is at 150, this is not. So I'm going to count 50, 100, 150, 200, 250. So this is X 250. It also looks like it's not on an even line. It's halfway down when we get to the Y. Let's just deal with the X first. 50, 100, 150, 200, 250. Let's get back to our code. Go to line 12. And we're going to type triangle, parentheses, semicolon. And we look at the instructions. First point X, there should have been a comma there. So let's put that in. I already forgot what I said. Was it 250? I think it was. All right, 250, comma. We get a look at that drawing. 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 250. Now figuring out the Y without a chart would be a big old drag. But I've got this chart here, so let's get a look. 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300, and change. So how far is that? I want you to just join me on this one, right? We're gonna have to wing it a little bit. Oh, you know, actually, let me zoom in just so I could show you I'm not making stuff up. I just counted down, and this line here is 300 pixels down.
350.
350 if it was halfway, you know? But is it? I don't know. We could try it. You know, let me just take a look at my own notes. Yeah, I actually meant to set it up at 320, but let's try 350 and see how it goes. 350. All right, comma. All right, the next thing it wants to know is the second point. So we're going around clockwise, right? So right now we want to find the second point's X position. How far is that second point from the left wall? I told you this one's gonna be a little bit more challenging. So we're talking about this point. Since we're going around clockwise, it's the second point. And how far is it from the left wall? 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300, 350, 400, 450. All right, this is X 450. Everything's judging from the same beginning point. X0 is the left wall. So that's 450. Let's go to our code. So it wants to know the next point, where it is, and on the X axis. And I just counted, it's 450. I'm going to type comma. Now, it wants to know the Y. You know, where is the Y? And I have to say, of course, we have choices about it, right? You know, where that Y is, right? It's going to begin the base of it. So I want to show you something here. I want to stick with the drawing for this. You know, we'll come back and check this one out later. But I need the Y position. It counts from the top. You guys hang on a second here. I just noticed I got a couple chats. I just want to make sure. All right, sorry, nothing urgent. And I did hear the doorbell, so just give me a second. All right, so I'm going to count down from the top. 50, 100, 150, 200, 300, 350, 400, 450, 500. Does that make sense? Is that right? No, the whole height is 500. My counting went off. This has got to be 450. 50, 100, 150, 200.
450.
400, 450. Thank you. It is 450 indeed. So let's go pop that in. We're up to the last point. Strangely, it's going to be easier, you know, because if you look at the drawing, we're reminded that the last point is the one that lined up with all the others. This had X150. The whole green box had X150. This is going to be X150 also. So 150.
Professor,
Yes.
I have a question. Is that is the first point is 350, not 250?
Oh, really? I see what you're saying.
300.
Right. You're good at this. Yeah, as soon as you said it, I know you're right. You know, because the rectangle started 150 over. How wide did we make that rectangle? Yeah, the rectangle was 300 wide. So wouldn't it have to be 300?
Yeah.
Right, 300, right. She's right. So let's fix that, guys. Could you go to the first number and tell that the peak of your triangle to be at X 300. Let's save it. All right. I didn't mean, I don't want anyone to get lost. So I just want to remind you where we're at really, right? We just repaired this one, right? And sure enough, I should just be looking at the rulers. Here's 300 pixels. But here we are on this one, right? And I'll use the ruler this time. You can see it's 450 pixels down from the top, as we said, right? But it's also 150 over from the left. So you could think of this ruler on the top almost like an X ruler. And this one here would be the Y ruler. So actually, we have to type in that last digit, 150. Before we even check it out, because we're probably going to have to make some changes. Let me just get this off. Yeah. Let's just remind ourselves. This is the peak of the triangle. X and Y.
Professor,
Yes.
the third point is Y made, the last one is 450.
This one?
The last one.
This
The third point, last one is 450.
450 down from the top. And I said that and I didn't type it.
Yeah.
I'm giving myself a failing grade for this. I swear. But I got Xu Ying here, so it's all right. All right, let's see what we've got. Let's save it. Because, you know, you never know until you look. Let's refresh it. It's not bad, right? I mean, the peak of it, I'm going to double check against the drawing, because if someone gave me that grid and I was going to program it, I'd have to be exact, right? It really wouldn't be an artistic choice, right? So I want to check something out. The important thing with the triangle is to realize you're starting on top at the peak. So I said 300 over, but 350 down. I'm going to go compare that to the Illustrator drawing. 300 over, and I'm going to come way over here. And this is actually in the drawing 320 pixels down. Each of these tiny boxes are 10 pixels. 10, 20, right? So this is actually 20 down. I'm going to actually fix it. And let's do it together. So this is where the peak is in terms of Y. And we made it a little bit lower than it should be. So I want to change that to 320 and save it. Go back into the browser and refresh it. Now, of course, you could change any of these. You know, if you want this kind of wide-based triangle, there are a few rules. For one, both the left and the right corners have to have the same Y. You know, because this is essentially a line down here, just like the line we made ourselves, right? And if this Y is different, it'll be either higher or lower. Let's just get a quick peek and change this corner. If you know how to change this corner, go ahead and change it on your own before I do and see what it produces. So you want to find the part of the code that represents the last coordinates Y. It's Y axis. I'm going to make mine higher on the page, so it's going to be a lower number, right? The top of the page is 0. XY for the first point, XY for the second. Here's the last point, X and Y. And it's currently set to 450. But this is what it would look like at 350. So since we're just working with geometric shapes, I want to put that back. I like the way it looked. Save it. I want to move on because I got more cool stuff on this subject, but I do want to mention a couple quick things about this. So if you were drawing a house, a simple house, people often will draw a little square with a triangle on top. You know, maybe you want a chimney there. You'd actually have to figure out the coordinates for the chimney, right? And I don't want to claim to be an expert at P5. You know, I teach a lot of drawing and a lot of drawing related stuff, but I don't typically draw in P5 myself. The next thing that I would want to know is, how do you draw a polygon? You know, so a polygon is a multiple point straight line shape, but it's not a rectangle or a triangle. You know, anything but. So I'd like to learn, how do I have total freedom? You know, and again, it'd be easy to look up. I'd look up P5 polygon and I'd probably get instructions for it right away. But let's take a look at the rest of the code on that page before we leave. If you look at line 14, I kind of wish we'd hit that first, because that's the actual stroke color. So if we're going to take a look at it, I got black here, and I think I'd like to change it to something bright. By the way, in color theory, the opposite of purple is yellow. I think I'm going to run with some kind of yellow. And of course, I could go to the color picker and find myself a nice yellow. Or if I'm okay with just generic yellow, I could do it like this. If you want to use a color by name, you got to put quotes inside those parentheses and then write the name of the color. I'm going to save it just to make my point and get back to the tab. And it might need me to change the weight for that to work out. So I want to change the stroke weight before we see what went wrong. I've had this problem before. So if your color's not showing up, let's see if stroke weight fixes it on line 16. This thinks in pixels. I want a nice thick line. I'm going to make a 5 pixel stroke weight. So I told it to be a color. It's not showing up. I'm changing the stroke weight on line 16 to see if it has any effect. Let's save it. I'm going to come back here and refresh it. And I got to take a look at my notes to see why this has happened to me once before. I'm going to try the hex code. Is it working for any of you guys? No, stroke color's not showing up. It's pretty weird. I'm going to try it a different way. It's funny, I was doing this just earlier today too with complete success. Let me get a look and see what might have happened here, a moment of troubleshooting. Everything else is working just fine. Give me a second to troubleshoot. I want to double check something here. That doesn't look right. Give me a second. I want to double check something. I'm going to take a quick peek at some finished file. All right, that one works. Let's just see what's up with it. A little troubleshooting. I would like to learn something also. For the life of me, I don't see any difference on this one. I'm going to borrow it. I want to put this aside and just see. Strange. Are any of you guys spotting a difference down here on my last 3 lines, 14, 15, and 16?
You put a name, color, and fill.
Say that again? Oh, right. True. This one? That's true, but I should be able to go ahead with the hex code anyway. I don't think that's going to change anything. Let me save it and find out. No, still working. Is anyone having success with that at all?
Maybe
You are,
we
Alex?
can add the fill color in it.
Yeah,
And
well,
it
that's an
will-
interesting point. I'm going to take that line out. I want to see if that, oh, I see. Right, that's interesting. I'm going to leave this blank for a second then, just to see through the experiment for a moment. I'm going to put that color in the stroke. So I got an empty fill. I think that's it. I think that's the problem. It wants a color in both, which is kind of interesting. You guys try that out. Put a color in for the stroke. That's the
Yeah,
output.
Professor, I put a color in both and it worked.
All right, I have to remember that. I'm going to have to take a note for myself because I've made this mistake before, I have to confess. So it's always at the end of the semester. All right. So yeah, if everybody would make their own choices about stroke and fill. Again, you can use the name of colors if you want, like that. So it can have hex code or a name of a color. Save it, and let's come back and refresh it, and you should be fine. Any more successes? I want to move on to something else, though. This is pretty interesting. It's definitely a solid intro to how people draw, but I do want to show you guys something else. So I'm back on the handout, and this is about making shapes. I want to move on to programming interactivity, just a little bit about interactivity. And we have another file called interactivity1.js. So what I need for you to do is get back to Sublime, but also we need to drag one more page into Sublime, one more page of code. So I have to get to my folder somehow. I'm going to close this one up because it's going to confuse me for sure. Right? The one we want is this one. We were just using 3 shapes. Now we want interactivity1.js. So I'm going to ask you to drag it right into Sublime or into brackets. Just drop it in there. Now, one thing I want to point out is I gave you one HTML file and a bunch of JavaScript files. So that means anytime you want to try a different JavaScript file, you have to change the HTML to no, so that it knows which JavaScript it's borrowing. So if you brought interactivity1.js in already, could you click back on your HTML page? Because we're talking about line 11. Line 11 still thinks we're looking at 3 shapes. But now we want it to say interactivity 1. Careful with the spelling. Interactivity1.js. So you're not losing anything. I want to point that out, right? Anytime you want to see the other page, you just change line 11 in the HTML. So right now we're just using it as a template. So let's save that HTML page, get right back to the browser, right? The one with the shapes, and simply refresh it. Now we got a peek at the author's sample of this last class. And the way it worked is if you just move the mouse around, we're getting a certain series of white circles with a black stroke. But if you press, you get a different color. So the interactivity is all mouse-based, right? Your visitors interacting with the artwork, right? Largely what we mean when we see interactivity, right? Right? They're mousing around, right? And it's different if they press or if they don't. So let's get back to Sublime and check out the JavaScript. It's also not that huge, right? We could see how to change the width and height of the canvas, but we already know that. We could see how to change the background color of the canvas. Then comes the new stuff. Function draw, right? So in this particular case, the drawing has a conditional statement. I want to remind you of something I said to you the other day. If raining, take umbrella. Else, sunglasses? I don't know. That's a conditional statement. So here it says, if the mouse is pressed, fill that circle with black, right? 0, remember you could do white to black with just numbers, but I'd rather you use a color, right? So I'm going to ask everybody to figure out how you want to use your colors. Do you want to write just a color name in there? Or do you prefer to use hex code? I'm going to go get myself some hex code. So the background is green. you know, which we could change, but I'm not going to bother with that. I'm going to take a kind of a lighter greenish yellow here, and I'm going to highlight the hex and copy it. Simply go right back to that conditional statement and say, well, if the mouse is pressed, please give me that kind of khaki color I just chose. I want to get a look at it before I go any further though. So I'm going to save it and go back into my browser. I'll bring that right back if anyone needs it. And I'm going to refresh it. And I have to press. All right, that worked out nicely. So we just changed just the press color, right? If the mouse is pressed, fill it with this, fill the shape with that. Otherwise, like this here is telling it to fill it with white. I'd like you to pick a different color. I'm going to go with a brighter yellow. It's interesting how many art forms make good use of the color pickers. So again, when you're using hex code or names, you got to put quotes in there. I'm going to save this. I don't mind if you use the same hex code. I know most of you are, you know, kind of too creative to do that. But if you're feeling tired, feel free. All right, whenever you're ready, go back to that page and refresh it. The first shape now has got a different color, right? So we've got two brand new colors of our own, and we also know how to change the background. Let's see what else is doing in that conditional statement, and if we could change it even our own. Could we just add elements of our own? One thing I'd like to try with you before we go further is see what we could do with stroke weight. They all have a black stroke right now, but can we change the weight? How thick are the outlines? I'd like you to try it on pressed. And here's the way it would go. Can everybody take a hard look at this for a minute? It says, if mouse is pressed, curly bracket. Now, we saw a lot of these when we were doing CSS. And even then we knew where this closes is very important. Here's where it closes. So anything between this one and this one is only going to take place when someone presses down the mouse. So what I'd like for you to do is go right after line 8 and add a line. And I'd like you to try this. Let's see if it works. So I'm telling it, if it's pressed, don't just change the fill color, but change the width of the outline. I got to put a number in there. So I'm going to start with a big number to see what it looks like. 10, that's 10 pixels, pretty thick. And I'm going to save it and get back in there and refresh it. So it's only on pressed. Very interesting, right? No press. And it's interesting now, once I pressed, it seems to remember that. Didn't go back. It was just kind of interesting. Here's my code, by the way. I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, Ira, just put the stroke weight after else. Tell it to change back. And yeah, we could do that. Because we don't have a lot more time today, so I'm not going to go doing that. I want to draw your attention to line 13, though. Line 13 is an interesting line, right? It's all about the ellipse, the shape that that person is drawing, right? And here it says mouse X, mouse Y, which is definitely following the mouse. Where is it on the X-axis? How far is it from the left wall? Mouse Y, how far is the mouse? So this is asking for interactive input. You know, it's all about what your visitor's doing, not about you. But this is the original size. So a perfect circle has to have matching numbers. If you want an ellipse instead, make this number bigger. So I'm on line 115. I'm going to change that to 120 pixels. So it's going to go from round to elliptical. I'm going to save it and go right back to that page and refresh it. So in line 13, I made one change. This is the width of that ellipse. I saved it, and I'm going to come back here and refresh it. There's my new shape. How are you guys? Still good? Excellent. So what I'm trying to do is I'm moving through different levels of complexity. In terms of our work, suppose the triangle was the most complex part. But in terms of what we're looking at now, I'm very interested in conditional statements. In my career, I've had to use them for lots of things. I think I mentioned last class that amongst them is if you're making a form, you know, like for e-commerce, someone types their name and their credit card data, and someone writes big dummy because they're, you know, that type of person. It'd be great to answer them and say, that is not a acceptable name. Please try again. And it's an if-else statement. Truth is, I'm not going to type big dummy in just a conditional statement to look for it. I'm probably going to put in all the world's most popular curse words, which I choose not to say out loud right now on YouTube, on Zoom or YouTube. But it'd be a conditional statement. If the person says blah, blah, tell them not to. All right, in any case, I want to get a look at my handout for a minute. We got a little taste of programming interactivity, what it looks like. There's a whole family of conditional statements, like if else. There's one called while, you know, keeps on checking for something. All right. I want to talk about programming motion. We got a little taste of this last week. It's one of my favorite parts, really, because it's animation, you know. It's virtually the same one we saw, but I'd like you to have a copy of the actual code. So I want to try that next. I need you to return to Sublime, get a hold of your folder because we got to drag one more JavaScript out. And I want the one called Animation 1. We just drag it out. The other stuff is safe, but the only way for us to look at Animation 1 would have been either to make a new HTML file for every JavaScript, which would have gotten messy, or to keep reusing the same HTML file. So let's set up our HTML file to recognize this JavaScript. Let's go back to that HTML. Again, we're on line 11. This time we want to tell that HTML to look at animation1.js. So I'm checking my spelling a lot because I'm tired these days. I've been making some goofy errors. That looks right. So I'm going to save it. And I want to get to the browser and refresh it. So it's animation 1 we're talking about. I'm going to refresh this. Remember this guy? We got to look at him last Thursday. And I want to revisit this, right? So there's a couple interesting things about it. The ball is moving up the y-axis, right? It's heading towards 0y, which is the ceiling, right? It begins at the very bottom, and we need to know the height of this box to know what this is in terms of y, right? So whatever this number is, it's taking off one, then another one, then another one to move the ball up a pixel at a time, right? So let's get a look at the code. So once you got the HTML to know about it, it's all about the JavaScript file. So we're looking at animation1.js. Now we visited a lot of these ideas. I want to draw your attention to something at the bottom for a minute. If you go toward the bottom of the code, you might remember this from last week, but here we're doing it from scratch. Look at line 23. It's all about y, right? So that's always about top down, right? We know the top is 0, but here it says y equals y minus 1. So what is y currently? You know, if it's 500, that's a different set of math than if y started at 300. So one thing I want to check out is I want to look up higher and see what I could learn from the canvas itself, the whole rectangle. The rectangle here says to be 720 wide, but we don't really care. But it told the canvas to be 400 tall. That's an important number because of line 9. So if you look at line 9, it says y equals the height. And believe it or not, P5 just knows what you mean. That's the height of this canvas. So at that moment, y is 400. Starts that way. 400 is the bottom. This is why you saw the circle come up from the bottom toward y0. started at Y400 because of this. Y said be the height, and here's the height. If we change that number, everything's still going to work. So let's come down though again though to line 23. Now that we know that, it says Y is starting at 400, but it keeps rereading it, and it sets it to 399. Then it sets it to 398, 397, all the way till 0, right? Let's make it go a little faster though. Instead of 1 pixel at a time, can you tell it to go 5 pixels at a time? So on line 23, I said Y minus 5. I want to save it, get a look at that page. It's going significantly faster, and this is a very common way to control speed with code. I want to mention just quickly, in case any of you are taking class with me next semester, on Fridays at 9 in the morning, I'm teaching Intro to 2D Animation. That's MMP100fall2020. And I got a couple emails from you, very kind emails, for people who wanted to study with me again. That's so flattering. Thank you. I got to warn you, that class is strenuous. You know, if you want to do some weightlifting, it's a good class. You know,
I'm ready for it.
yeah, I know that about you. So it's a good class for people who feel that way. For people looking for an easy ride, don't take that class. At least don't take mine. There may be an easier one. MMP100fall2020. There's 8 homeworks. There's twice as many as you guys had. They're bigger homeworks. And the class is a long class. You know, it's like 3 hours, 40 minutes. So just on a Friday yet, you know? So even the kindest people are like, And I'm always like, come on, come on. All right. In any case, we don't do any code though. You know, that class is very visual.
Professor,
You know, it's not code-based animation.
Professor,
Yes, Emily.
is it really MMP260?
Yes.
Because it doesn't work for me.
Oh,
my-
you know what? They just changed the name.
Yeah, it's NE260.
M-E?
Yeah,
ANI260.
Annie, A-N-I. Thank you, Emily. I totally forgot that.
yes, because I can't find the MMP 260 on the course
They
list.
just changed the name. They just changed it. So now I got to change all my handouts.
Yeah, and your name is not there, at least for
Yeah, they told me that. It's me. The 9 in the morning, Friday, that's me. They told me my name's going to show up any day now. So I don't know what the delay was, but yeah, it was confirmed just yesterday, the day before. But thank you for reminding me, Emily. I was telling all these people the wrong number, A-N-I. So anyway, like I said, I'm pleased that a couple of you are going to take it. Just don't be mad at me when you discover that it is a lot harder than this, but it's fun. I have to add that it is just so cool. Really, it is. I mean, really, we make people walk and talk and all kinds of cool things. So, all right. But you have a head start too, because we just did all this Adobe Animate. All right, let me get back to it. Where was I? Yes. Let's get a look at this code a little bit. So that's the one part I really wanted to point out most because, you know, we did visit this exact same code last time. And I think with what you know, there's a lot that you could understand on your own. You know, I do want to just mention one little thing from last week. If you look at line 7, it's setting the X in a very smart way. We know that X is all about how far it is from the left wall. But look at this crafty way it puts it in the middle. It says divide the width by 2, because that's always the middle. That means no matter what I do to the width, that circle is going to stay smack middle. It knows 400, but if I change it to 600, it would know, oops, not that, that. And here, it's still in the middle. I didn't have to give it a different number. It's just very crafty. I want to put that back. All right. You know, since we don't have a lot of time, I want to show you guys something that's a little bit more intense. Let me just get a look at my own handout for a minute. Make sure that I'm not skipping anything critical. So I want to talk about what if you bravely wanted to put some of this on an HTML page with the skills you learned early this semester and just a little bit more. So let's say you have, excuse me, text wrapped around a photo. And then in the next paragraph, you want text wrapped around a rectangle also, but you don't want a photo. You want maybe the animation file in there. All right, so this is how we're going to do it. I'd like for you to put away this window in Sublime. So you could close it if you like, or you could just, put it aside. It's up to you. And in Sublime, I want you to open a brand new window. File menu, new window. Because this next one's a little bit more complicated. I'd rather have a brand new empty window. File menu, new window. I want you to get back to today's assets. And this is about that little folder I put up there. And I separated it for a few reasons. It needs 3 files to work, and I didn't want people to get confused if I drop them all in one folder. So it's just there to be neat. So we're talking about the subfolder called positioning P5 with div. I'd like you to drag the HTML out. I'd like you to drag the JavaScript out. And we haven't seen any CSS for a while. I want you to drag the CSS out. And then I want you to go back to positioning the HTML file. Let's just get a look at it before we even go further. So I want to mention, in another school, I was the portfolio teacher. So the art students who were aiming to continue their education were creating portfolios, but really most of them were looking for jobs, right? And I was not the P5 teacher. Frankly, in those days, I never even heard of P5. So the portfolio students were like, hey, I want to show you this cool code I wrote. How do I get it in my portfolio? And at the time, I was like, what? Didn't the P5 teacher talk about that? No. So this was hard-won information. I got to tell you, this is not easy to find on the internet. And if any of you are that attracted to this material, save yourself this folder, put it somewhere, right? Because as I said, hard-won stuff. Okay. So I want to point out a few things. Line 4 links to the style sheet. Now you guys were all pretty expert at this, but it's been a while, right? So we could see if the style sheet's important, but sure enough, there is a link to it. Line 5, which I only mentioned today, so I really want to repeat it, is utterly critical, right? It's a script tag that reaches out to the internet, HTTP, it's on the internet, to get the engine that could run P5. Without this line, you got to remember, P5 is never going to work, which also means that if you go offline, your page won't work. If your internet goes down, all the local stuff you did will work, but this isn't local. It's connecting to a remote feature. Again, a content delivery network. Then line 6 is the line that we've been editing on the other HTML page. We kept changing it to tell it which JavaScript to read. And this one's looking at animation too. But then if you look in the body section, there's mostly familiar stuff. And one thing that's new, there's a big H1, right, with this big headline. And then there's this div. Now, before we look at this, I'd like to get this page, this HTML page, open in the browser. So get yourself a tab. And however you do it, I want you to get this positioning HTML in there. So you can see what the goal is. So it's the same animation file that we were just using, even though it's a different copy, it's maybe different color. There's the H1. Here's a bunch of paragraphs. And if you remember float, remember float? We spent a lot of time in CSS telling photos float left or float right. And what was more important than where the photo went was the way the text wrapped around the photo. It wasn't a line left or a line right, right? It was float left. Float is not just the object, but it tells everything near it what to do. So all this text knows it's supposed to wrap around this floated rectangle, just like it was a photo. All right, let's get a look at that code then. So first, the HTML. Line 11 has a very important tag called div, D-I-V. A lot of the next stuff you're likely to do in HTML is going to use div. Sometimes those fancy nav bars you see where all the buttons are on a really nice looking, it's called a navigation bar, you know, at the top of a website, that's usually a div. So for a moment, let me just mention a bit about div. Div is a box. So anytime you need a box because you have some special idea for it, a person makes a div. Now, what can you put in that? Some designers like what's called a call out. They take a few words from the article that are really important, maybe a quote, you know, an important quote, and they put it in a box and they make the quote really big and it makes people want to read the article. That'd be a good reason. So anytime you have a specialized reason you need a box, it's a div. The weird thing about div is it has no width, it has no height, no color, and no stroke. So you pretty much have to use CSS if you're going to use a div. So we're going to look at the CSS in a minute, but I need to mention one more thing. ID. That is exactly what you may be thinking, identification, right? So your main ID is your name. You know, we go by first name basis, right? So my ID equals Ira. So I have to give this div a name, a personal identifier, so I could talk to it. And I chose to call it holder only because it's holding my P5, right? I could have called it anything. I could have called it box. I just chose to call it holder. Let's take a quick look at the style sheet. To style an ID, it looks like this, £, and then whatever you called it. It's a custom name. So it says, okay, oh, I know you're talking about an ID, and you're talking about the one called holder. So I gave it a width to match the P5, to match that animation. The canvas in the P5 is 600 by 400. So I matched it. I gave it a width, I gave it a height. I gave it a border down here because I thought it looked good. I told it to float left, and that was the big deal. That's why the text looks so nice wrapping around it. And of course, there's good old margins. But I really did have to give it the width and the height. All right. I want you to notice something else. Okay, so that styled the box, but it's still, how does it know to put that script in there? How does it know to run that animated code, right? Let's take a look at the JavaScript then. So this JavaScript is very similar to the last one that we did, the animation. Here's where the width was set and the height, colors, right? The jiggling action going on over here. You know, even the speed that it moves at. Where was that?
Oh,
There it is. Here's this, you know, the speed, right? All right. But this stuff is new. Look at lines 7 and 8. Here, this is weird, right? It's not a lot of code, but it's a little weird, right? Gotta say, it takes a lot of getting used to, right? So let's get a look at it. It creates a variable called myCanvas. What in the world is a variable? You know, whenever you write a letter to somebody, you write, hello, Jill, hello, Sam, right? So the variable is first name. One could say, hello, variable, et cetera, how you doing, blah, blah, right? So in this case, we're creating a way to control the canvas. Now, you know what create canvas does already. So we're saying my canvas. And then here it says my canvas is the parent of holder. What does that all mean? All it means is the div that you also gave a name, right? We called it holder, is told to hold the canvas. These two lines, the HTML made the box div. The CSS controlled what the box looked like a big picture frame. But these two lines make the JavaScript run in it. Pretty interesting. All right. I suppose if one really did want to mess with this, you could add these lines to any of the JavaScripts we use today, right? You know, and to see how they behave. But you would want to make some HTML that looked a bit like this. Folks, I want to tell you something. I don't always teach this part, right? Because it definitely gets a little more gray. I always give this as a gift to anyone who wants. Like if you want to learn how to position it with the other stuff that we did, just check out this folder. Here I'm trying to give you a head start. Let's just take one more peek. So the new stuff is this. The HTML needed these 3 lines. The middle is really just a comment. Our P5 art's going to go here, right? So the HTML has to have a div, right? That's a box. I would like to show you one quick thing because I exaggerated a bit. The next thing I went to was the style sheet where it told this identifier, this holder, you know, by name. It called it by name and said, hey, holder, do all these things. I want to show you what it would look like if I didn't do that. What if I took this whole style out? I'm going to do Command X. Because the truth is, I don't really need the style sheet. I just want it. And I want to show you why I say that. It's interesting to me that even though I didn't give div a width or a height, it's wrapping around the JavaScript. So it's sort of shrink wrapped. You know, like you put, wrap a fruit, it's the shape of the fruit. So in this case, the div just sort of wrapped around the JavaScript. But it doesn't have a border, and it's not letting the text wrap around it. So it's really not as interesting. And that's the only reason why I chose to style it. I'm kind of wondering whether I needed the width and height. I'm going to be the guinea pig. I put the style back, but I'm taking out the width and height. I'm going to, again, let's find out. I'm going to save it. And I didn't. That was extra work on my part. That's funny, I never noticed that. So really all I needed were these. Frankly, float was the big player, but I like the margin. And I like pushing everything a certain distance away. I'm going to put it back just so I'm not too confusing. When you break it down, it starts to make sense. You make the box. If necessary, you style it on the style sheet, right? You just have to know the ID. Last but not least, you could have used any JavaScript, but it would have needed these lines in it. All right, folks, I want to wrap it up. Does anybody have any general question for me? I'll do my best about P5. Nobody? So I really want to be blunt. I'm feeling kind of lucky because I'm not an authority on P5. They asked me to do this because I use a lot of JavaScript related languages. I spent years using ActionScript, which was the programming language for Flash until Flash died, right? ActionScript was almost just like JavaScript. So then I've done a bunch of JavaScript. I'm a big fan of something called jQuery. It's all over my website. My website, you click a little line and a whole bunch of paragraphs open to tell you about it. It's JavaScript, it's jQuery, that style. It's all JavaScript family. So now you got an introduction to the Java family, right, with P5. And I just want to say one last thing on this particular subject. This is really a personal thing, whether or not you want to head this direction. If you're just interested, you enjoy it, and you also want to learn more about programming, we'll take a look at the handout where you can go to learn more, right? Because we got a good start. On the other hand, if you're more, how do I put it? Career driven, specifically, I only want to learn the stuff that comes with a price, that comes with a paycheck, right? You might want to head straight over to JavaScript. JavaScript is really, it's a little exhausting, but if you like code, you like JavaScript. It's highly desired in the web design world. And frankly, Adobe Animate could read JavaScript now. So it boggles the mind how many possibilities there are when you take animations like we've been making and actually add code to it. Look, if there's no questions, I want to look at the handout, just wrap it up today, because we're going to start in essentially the last section of our course next week. So let's get to the handout. Just talk that up for a couple minutes and we'll wrap it up. So there's a little of information about how we did the positioning on the handout. All right. Before I talk about where we're heading after today, I do want to point this out. This is the same list I had in the last handout. This is the link to the main P5 website. This is the boss of P5. So most people start there. On the other hand, I like some videos on the P5 subject, particularly this code train. The guy's friendly and funny, kind of weird really, but he's got a whole set of free tutorials if you really like this stuff for P5 to get here to get to the whole list. But I think you would probably want to start here. If you go to the beginning of his stuff, similar to what we did. But here moves a little bit forward. You might want to start here on code training. And that's my whole thing for P5. I want to talk to you about next week. So Thursday is Thanksgiving, right? And I hope everyone in here has something to be thankful for. My family had to recreate Thanksgiving to feel it. I get a little ill when I see pictures of invaders dancing with Indians, because that just, Native Americans, because that like never happened. So I hate using Thanksgiving to make Americans feel better about, an ugly part of our past. I don't want to rub it in, but I just don't want to make believe. I just want to be real. I like the idea of a holiday devoted to thanks, though. So I'm going to thank you for making this a terrific semester. We have more left, but you guys have really made it kind of fun. I feel lucky. I get paid for this. That's cool. But next week we return to Adobe Animate. So I've been looking it over to see if I want to make any last minute changes. So I want to reserve the right to, be kind of flexible. But the main mission when we come back is to learn a little bit more about kinetic type. You might remember we did, I think it was Pieces, Always Beautiful or something like that. We did a little quote. You guys really kind of adapted to it rather quickly. We want to take off from that point because I'm going to either introduce the final right away on next Tuesday, or I'm just going to warm us up and wait till Thursday. I'm going to look it over myself and see, what makes the most sense for us. So Tuesday is either going to be a warm up for the final or the actual introduction of the final. So please do your best to be there Tuesday. If not, be sure not to miss the video. On Tuesdays, the videos usually get posted kind of early, usually before evening. But, most of you in the habit coming live. That's always best. Any questions for me from anyone? About anything? No? Everybody with their cameras off? Any of you guys? Should I check my chats?
Nothing at all.
Nothing at all? Let's see. All right. Guys, I want to wish you all the best Thanksgiving again. I'm thankful, and I hope you have some things. I know some of us have had major dramas in 2020, and I'm really also have been hit really hard 2020. I have a family member who's suddenly very, very ill as of yesterday. So I'm still kind of reeling from it. But just like I've said to everybody else, we do our best to stay strong, stay creative in every way that might mean to you, right? And there you have it. I will see you all next class. I'm going to spend a little time with Chris, who asked early for that time. So I'm going to deal with him right now. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody else. Folks, it's been nice. I'll see you all next week. Oh yeah, enjoy the long weekend. How cool is that?